Hi there, I'm Jim.
And I'm Claire.
Let's talk teaching. Welcome to Let's Talk Teaching, a podcast from the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology here at Illinois State University. I'm Jim G. Joining me once again, Dr. Claire LaMonica, our director. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, we're recording this middle of November.
Yes.
It's going to go out probably in a couple weeks, and we are in prime time for those end-of-term evaluations that all of us faculty members are giving our students. So we wanted to talk about that today. You have people come and talk to you about these once in a while, don't you?
Yeah, not just me, but several of us here at CTLT often hear from faculty, usually in the bleak midwinter,
Right. Yeah.
In January or when they're pulling them out and looking at them, and they may feel flummoxed, just confused by them, or they may feel concerned about them. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes they find their way over to talk to us about them.
So today we want to talk a little bit about what we should really, as instructors, expect to get out of these to an extent. And an important caveat, as we were talking before we started to record this, was your mileage may vary because these assessments vary across campus, right?
Right. Aside from the College of Applied Science and Technology, where they use a standard evaluation form, they use the IDEA across the college. Mm-hmm. Other than that, it's my understanding that each academic department has its own evaluation form. So those vary widely, and they were, devised in widely different ways. So. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But we want to talk a little bit about what faculty members should expect to get out of this, what they shouldn't worry about as much, that sort of thing, and how to actually use these as positive tools for planning your next round of teaching.
Absolutely.
As opposed to being something that just kind of gets us down during the bleak months of winter.
Something else to feel bad about in January.
Right. So to start out, in general, tell us why we do this. Why do you have these sort of end of semester evaluations? Why is it a good thing?
It is a good thing. Good teachers are reflective practitioners, and without course evaluations or student evaluations of teaching, as they're sort of called in the field, we wouldn't have as much to reflect on. It's important to gain a variety of perspectives on our teaching. And we talk about this every time we talk about, assessing our own teaching. But one very important perspective to get is our students' perspective. And this is one way of getting that information. And
I think the key word there, as you emphasize, is perspective, because it is an important view. It's how the students are kind of framed, or how they are framing what they see going on in the course, but we have to understand it is also from their perspective. So as we read these results, we have to realize we have to kind of be in their shoes a little bit too.
And that's valid, I think. Our students are our primary audience.
That's true.
They're who we're teaching.
Yeah.
So if we want to know how we're doing at our job, it's really nice if we consult our primary audience and ask them, hey, how am I doing? It's really the only thing that makes sense. If your car mechanic wanted to know whether he'd done a good job fixing your car, he'd probably have to ask you. That's why you
exactly right.
sometimes get a follow-up survey from your car mechanic.
Right.
So.
Beyond the basic threshold of, did you survive the car trip home after I fixed it?
Did the car make it home?
Right.
That's a good metric.
Yeah. My class just filled out its evaluation last night. I actually was in another instructor's class last night delivering the
because your department trades off. Yeah.
My department trades off,
right.
and I'm holding people can't see it at home.
A very stubby little pen.
I'm holding my commemorative end of semester evaluation.
Pencil.
Yeah, golf pencil or whatever you call these things. These fiendish little
things. I have
things.
to tell you, I don't want to get into politics, but I have to tell you that after a lifetime in academics, I am so ingrained that you have to use a number 2 pencil, that when they gave me a marker to vote with, I was really disconcerted. I thought, wait, is this going to count?
This isn't going to work.
Don't I need a number 2 pencil? So, whatever. Yeah, well, that's an aside. You can cut it if you want to.
No. I want to keep that in because I actually think that that's something I want to come back to towards the end, which is talking about how students approach these evaluations and how that affects what we see in terms of the numbers. Okay. But Okay, and speaking of numbers, so when I first started to get these, when I came to teach at Illinois State, because we did them a little differently at my previous institution, and I didn't actually see them all the time. So it was great that I was getting every semester. All of a sudden, I got an email and it had here's what they had to say.
Wow.
And I'm looking at a bunch of numbers, and I took statistics. I know what numbers are for and how they work. I don't always have as much faith that they're describing the universe precisely, but it's a comparison. I get at least a breakdown of how they rated me, how they rated all of the other 200 or 300 level courses that are taught in the department, and how they rate all this other stuff. So there are a lot of these numbers, and I think that causes some anxiety for us when we read these.
Well, it causes a lot of anxiety for me because, numbers make my eyeballs roll back in my head.
Right.
So I think there are probably differing levels of anxiety caused by numbers. I mean, I think probably people for whom numbers is their stock and trade are maybe not as flummoxed by
a
the
little more sanguine about the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And they also know that frequently with a course, you're dealing with a very small N.
Yeah.
You've got 20, 25 in a seminar course. Maybe you have 12. I mean, you have a really small number of people being asked these questions. So it's hard to take too much out of it. On the other end, you may be, if you're teaching a class of, 300-400 students, you have a really large N, but you also have sort of the confounding factor of, well, this is a class with 300 or 400 students. So the questions that seem applicable to a class of 25 may not be as applicable to a class of 300 or 400. So it's an important tool, but it's an imperfect tool.
So when faculty members come to you and they bring these numbers, they bring these results, what are they saying to you, and what are you saying to them?
Yeah. Well, usually if they come to us here at CTLT, and again, it's not just me, but when they come to me or my colleagues here at CTLT, usually it's because they're worried about something. And usually it's because they're worried because, they got a list and they found out that, their class was in the bottom quadrant of all 200 level courses being taught, or worse yet, they were in the bottom quadrant of everybody teaching in their department, or, some really worrying kind of thing like that. And so usually they want to know, well, their big question is always, how can I do better? How can I,
Sure, and that's a natural question.
How can I get higher numbers?
Well, okay, then there's that, yeah.
But yeah, I think there is a real concern. People here really care about their teaching. I have great confidence in that. And I'm pretty certain that anybody listening to this podcast really cares about their teaching.
Absolutely, yeah,
So,
I would hope so.
I think the goal really is to be a better teacher. And in that case, you have to, I think, avoid giving too much credence to one set of numbers, any one set of numbers. So what I really encourage people to do is to look at these assessment results, to look for trends, and to look for trends across courses in any given semester and across semesters in any given course. So, one set of evaluations from one class can tell you something about that snapshot of your teaching, that one course with that one set of students in that one semester. But every semester is different. Every set of students is different. Our courses are almost always different. We always tweak something before we teach them again. So it really is just a snapshot. I think the most important takeaways are the ones that we can glean from looking at trends.
Yeah, and I've benefited from that personally. One of the questions that's asked in the School of Communication is essentially, how it's a Likert type scale. So agree, strongly agree, disagree, etc. My instructor returns work quickly or in a timely manner, an appropriately, an appropriate length of time. And I had always struggled with that. For the longest time, I struggled with that. I still occasionally do. But I'm better at communicating when I'm not going to return stuff when I said I was.
Yeah.
But that was something that I learned over time. It's like, this wasn't just a fluke. This is a pattern I'm starting to see. So it's looking for patterns.
Right. It's looking for patterns. I frequently tell the story. Many people have already heard it about, the first time that a student said on one of my course evaluations, she plays favorites. Yeah. I wrote that off. And that was in the qualitative comments, not the quantitative. But a semester later, when a different student said the same thing in the same course, I thought, that's funny. Somebody said that last semester. The third time I heard it, I really had to start taking it seriously. Sure. And I had to figure out what it was I was doing that either was I playing favorites? I mean, I had to ask myself that question. And if I wasn't, what was I doing that gave that perception? So
because and a lot, at least the assessments I get, the student evaluations include an open question sort of thing, that more qualitative sort of feedback. But regardless, we have to think about why are the students drawing that conclusion?
Right.
It may not be that what they're saying is actually true, but they think that's what it is. So why are they thinking that's what it is?
Right.
And that's part of the reflection process for us as teachers, right?
Right, because they don't often include that. It would have been very helpful to me if the first student had said, she plays favorites. I could tell because she spends, more time talking to this student about his writing than she spends talking to me about my writing.
Yeah.
So, if I had been given that information the first time I saw that comment, it would have been very, very helpful.
Right. But the thing you didn't do, it sounds like, is what I even found myself doing. And I have talked to some faculty members who there's an initial reaction to this feedback where it's like, yeah, but they don't know that I do this work, and they don't know that and they try to create the counter argument because feedback can be tough sometimes.
Sure,
can't it?
Absolutely. And our students are not good at providing diplomatic or sometimes even constructive feedback. They're not good at providing constructive feedback in a diplomatic way. They just put it out there, and part of that is on us.
Sure.
We're asking students to think evaluatively without sometimes that's the only time we're asking them to think evaluatively in our class. And that's not a good thing.
No, that's true. That's true.
Providing constructive feedback in a diplomatic fashion is something that takes practice. And our students sometimes don't know how to do that. Sometimes they just can't be bothered. And often they don't provide any. They fill in the numbers. They fill in the bubbles, and then that's all we get. We only get the numbers.
Well, and that's why I wanted to kind of come back to which was I also get a sense, so last night I walked into this class and I had for another instructor, and I said, "Hi, I'm here to do the evaluation." And there was kind of this universal, so it's like, oh, we're doing this again. Yeah, really? So I think there is in some cases, there may be a little bit of evaluation fatigue. I don't know what you do about it. I guess you don't do anything about it, but you may need to recognize it a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's important for students to understand that faculty really do use those evaluations. When I go out to give midterm chats, I talk a little bit about how the chat as an alternative to or as a supplement to the end of semester evaluation. And I try not to pose it as an alternative. And I always make the point that instructors here at Illinois State, for the most part, do look at those evaluations. They do take them seriously, and they do make changes to their teaching or their courses based on their findings from the evaluations. So I think a lot of times students just think, this is just a waste of time. Nobody ever looks at these.
It's a little bread and circuses. It's just,
blah, blah, blah. It's just, they perceive it as busy work.
Right.
And if there's not any counter narrative, then why should they change their mind?
Yeah. Well, and we would hope then that if that counter narrative can be presented, that we'll get more accurate data. Yeah. We'll get more useful data out of this. I mean, you're always going to have. I always have one student who just marks all the ones, whatever. Just someone who I actually shouldn't say I always have that, but I often see that. And it may be that they are truly disenchanted with the course and my teaching. It could very well be that. And I always think about that.
Or they may be disenchanted with the process.
That's the other part of it.
Whatever. Right. I mean, you don't, you have to watch for the trend.
Yes.
If there are several students marking all 1s or 5s or whatever, and that's another thing is that students are poor students.
Yeah.
Every course they go in and if the course is in a different department, it's a different instrument, and sometimes 1s are good. And sometimes 1s are bad.
Yeah.
And they, unless they're reading very carefully, because I have had people bring me evaluations where they're given all lowest marks in the qualitative part, the quantitative part. Sorry, I get those confused. And then there are these glowing comments in the other part, the open-ended part. So
students didn't read the instructions carefully.
They didn't read the instructions carefully.
And of course, in some instruments, in fact, in a good instrument, there should be a few of those Likert type questions where it is reversed. So you're checking to see if they're actually paying attention or not. But I always thought 5 was always great, and 1 was already
not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
That's interesting. So, what other advice do you give to faculty members when they come and they talk about when they just say, "I don't know what to do with these numbers"?
Yeah. Well, I tell people, let's crunch them. You need to crunch the numbers. Don't try to take much away from just the raw data. And so we spend a little time crunching numbers. We look for averages, and if I'm feeling really geeky, I might talk about statistical, things like that. But I'm so rarely feeling that geeky. Anybody who wants to talk about things like that should probably see Julianne, because she's really good at that stuff. Yeah. But we tend to look, we look at averages and across the class, and which a lot of times that's already been figured. Yeah. And then, we kind of talk about, it's not as bad as it looks. More of these are, on the high side than are on the low side. But, and I also encourage people to not, this is really hard because we all do this, to not beat themselves up about the one student who gave them lowest marks on everything. Because, there is so often that one student.
Yeah, I said, yeah.
Yeah, and I just, I feel like in most classes, I'm going to have somebody who thinks I walk on water and somebody who thinks I am the devil's spawn. And I really try to throw out both of those. But I beat myself. I'm like everybody else. I beat myself up over that. I spend so much time concentrating on that one really negative one that it's hard for me to get past. So, I really encourage people to get past that. Let's talk about this body of information outside of this outlier or, outliers in each direction or whatever. So I think that's the other probably most frequently given piece of advice from Aunt Claire or whatever.
Maybe it would be good today to kind of end on that wider perspective. You and I, we talked about doing the episode, and we haven't yet, about why we both became teachers. Yeah. But part of that is that, teaching is a very personal profession, in that, you really have to have your identity. I am a teacher in order to do this, I think. There are people who come from industry and whatnot, and I was certainly one of those. I came from a profession, and I came back to teach in that discipline. There's a flip side, which is not to take teaching. It's a personal endeavor, but don't take it too personally all the time. In other words, you have to have you have to be able to take a step back and be not just reflective, but also objective about what you're doing.
Right. And I think being reflective can help you with that. In the broader scheme of things, this set of evaluations is one snapshot, is a snapshot. And how am I developing overall as a teacher? Am I making progress overall in the big scheme of things? Are all things working toward good? And that's what we're aiming at. So I think, trying to find a takeaway
Yeah.
You know, and you can't address every issue. You just can't do that. You can't.
No, and I think it's important not to make wholesale change every time you get an evaluation, because you're never going to,
right, because it's a single snapshot. It was one class. It's, and your students next semester may love that assignment that your students this semester hated. So, you can't just reinvent yourself as an instructor in response to every set of course evaluations. Mm-hmm. You have to have a sense of yourself and be moving in a sense of your best self and be moving towards that.
Well, I think achieving a sense of our best self is always a good goal. So I think that's also a good way to end today's episode. So Claire, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Let's Talk Teaching. You can find out more about the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology and our podcast by going to ctlt.illinoisstate.edu. You can find past episodes and learn how to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. For Claire LaMonica and everyone here at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology, happy teaching.